Berne. I welcome all of you to this webinar today on opportunities in the Indian microelectronics and precision component sector. This is the 11th webinar of a series of 12 live webinars that the Embassy of India has been organizing under the umbrella of the Momentum in India Swiss SMEs program. Microelectronics has affected almost every walk of life, such as healthcare, environment, education, agriculture, communication, robotics, automation, avionics, automobiles, instrumentation, power, military, and everything that we can imagine of. Microelectronics is the key driver for the economic growth in its role as a technology driver, enabler, and indicator of technological process and progress in the whole electronics chain. The phenomenal growth of the microelectronics technology has significantly contributed to the success of information and telecommunication technology in the last few decades. The government of India has undertaken a number of reforms for further increasing the ease of doing business in India and for further integrating with the world a self-reliant India making for the world. It is in this direction that this webinar is being organized with focus on both investment and trade aspects of this sector. India and Switzerland are long-standing dynamic partners. The MISSP program is being run by the Embassy of India Berne for further strengthening, establishing links between the Indian and Swiss business ecosystems. In the last 6 months, this program has been able to onboard more than 50 Swiss companies. Today, our presenters will include the knowledge partner of MISSP, T&A Consulting, the legal and tax partner of MISSP, Rotterdam Partner, and our guest speaker representing the Electronics and Computer Software Export Promotion Council of India. So with those words, let me now invite the first speaker of the day, Mr. Tarun Gupta, T&A Consulting, to please come over the screen and make a presentation on overview of Indian economy amidst the COVID-19 crisis. Mr. Gupta, over to you. Please take your screen.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. And good morning to all our participants from Switzerland, and a very sunny afternoon from here from India to all our participants who've logged in from India. And especially on a Friday. So thank you for taking time out on the Friday. Yes, we are in midst of a pandemic, and hopefully it's weaning away. But as one European leader said, never let a good crisis go waste. And in India particularly, whenever there's been a crisis, we have pressed our pedal on the accelerator to get our reforms going. This current pandemic will result in new business models, new business partnerships. Can India be the preferred business partner for Switzerland? What are the opportunities in India? And more importantly, what are the challenges? What has changed in India and what is changing in India? Over the next 15 minutes, I will aim to give a balanced view, not the Bollywood version. If there's an opportunity, there are some challenges as well. And finally, yes, this current pandemic has created another monster of webinars, presentations. So let's try to keep this presentation simple with some key messages on every slide. There's a lot of data. I give you a health warning, but I'll try and give some key messages on every slide. I've really divided the presentation into 3 sections. The first section talks about India. Second, talks about India opportunity. And third, talks about the reforms. So let's begin about India. 4 letters, the 4 Ds really describe India. What are those letters? This is democracy, demography, diversity, and disparity. Yes, we are the world's largest democracy. About 900 odd million people were eligible to vote in the last federal election. 600 million people voted, which shows our participatory nature of the democracy. The results were out in a couple of hours, which shows our ability to execute some large-scale events. However, democracy can be chaotic, can seem the decision-making sometimes can be delayed. And because you're relying on consensus. Demography, that's been our advantage. Even in the current pandemic, only 7% of our population is above the age of 65. In fact, our median age is about 28, 29, and we have over 70% of our population in the working age group. All great, very nice. In fact, we add to the population of Switzerland every month to our working population, and this will continue for the next 10 years. However, if we do not train our manpower, do not create number of jobs, then it's a demographic disaster. So the biggest challenge for our policy makers is to create so many quality jobs. Third is diversity. India is more diverse, even if you move from Northern Europe to Southern Europe. Diversity in eating habits, diversity in languages. We have 22 official languages. Sometimes companies may make a mistake of viewing India as one unitary market. And finally, disparity. That's the truth. Top 1% of the population controls 60% of India's wealth. Top 10% controls 77% of India's wealth. In fact, if you look at states in India, right, like cantons in Switzerland, we have 29 states. The difference between the most developed and the least developed state can be 10x. Whereas in other emerging markets like China or Brazil, this can be a difference of 4x. If you look at the map, top 8 states account for nearly 50% of country's GDP. And finally, if you look at the graph on your right, India is the only country which has moved from agrarian to services. I'm proud of that, proud of our IT sector, for example. It accounts for 1/3 of our exports, 8% of our GDP, but it employs only 1% of our working population. So what has been missing? That missing link is manufacturing. It's not an option. We need to get our manufacturing right. That's the key message. So what's our vision? We want to be a 5 trillion economy. It is very ambitious. It would require a real growth rate of 8%. It took us 60 years to reach first trillion, another 7.5 years to reach our second trillion. And now we want to double our GDP in the next 5 years. It is very ambitious. What would it require? It would require a virtuous cycle of savings, exports, and investments. So how are we doing on investments? In the last 70 years, we've got over $600 billion of foreign direct investment. Interestingly, half of that has come only in the last 5 years, which is about $300 odd billion. Let's break it up into further. Of this $300 billion, 40% has been in greenfield. 90% has been through the automatic route. What it means is that it did not require any prior government approval. It shows how open the economy is. In fact, it has got opened up further. I will talk about later. And if you are a foreign investor, you do not necessarily need a local partner. You do not need to share your trade secrets or intellectual property. In fact, India has been ranked as the 3rd most preferred greenfield destination. And why is that? The next slide answers that question. It's our aim to be in the top 50 ease of doing business. We are ranked number 63. We have jumped 79 position. We have ranked amongst top 10 performers in ease of doing business. We've all heard of the acronym BRICS. Let me give you a new acronym, MIVIT. Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, India, Thailand. These are the countries which competing as companies look to redistribute or rejig their supply chain. How do we stand? We stand favorably in these parameters which are there. But there is one thing which is different, which these countries do not have, which is a large domestic market. So with that, I come to the end of the first section of my presentation, where we spoke about India, the 4 Ds, democracy, demography, diversity, disparity. We spoke about our vision to be a 5 trillion economy and the improvement in ease of doing business. The second part of my presentation is about the India opportunity. 4 alphabets: CFID, consumption, formalization, infrastructure, and digitization. So what's that first alphabet? Consumption. Unlike some of the Southeast Asian countries, India is not an export driven or dependent economy. India is a consumption driven economy where 60% of our GDP is consumption. In fact, we are the 6th largest consumer market currently and expected to be the 3rd largest consumer market in the next 10 years. our whole private consumption expenditure is expected to increase to 4 times in the next 10 years. However, a word of caution. Some companies make a mistake of overestimating the Indian market. So look at the top of the pyramid. We are talking about 10 million households with household income above $30,000. Another 25 million households with household income between $15,000 to $30,000. So which gives you roughly about 35 million households, which are really the consuming class, which translate number of people about 200 million people. So 200 million is not a small number. However, it's not 1.3 billion. The second India opportunity is formalization. And what do I mean by that? India has about 75 million enterprises. Is it very entrepreneurial? Oh yes, India is very entrepreneurial. However, our number of enterprises are 22 times the total number of enterprises in the US. Even though their economy is 8 times our size, but we have 22 times more the number of companies. So what is behind these numbers? Only 10 million have any kind of tax registration. Only 5 million have any kind of tax and social security registrations. So what is the implication? Number one, impact on productivity. If you look at nearly 85% of our firms in manufacturing are less than 50 employees. So what we have done, due to some policies, challenges which were there, we have created dwarfs, companies which have remained small. Even after 10 years, they continue to employ less employees, and it has impacted productivity. Second is our tax to GDP ratio. We need to improve that. Currently, it's about 17%. Even compared to other developing countries like China, which is 22%, South Africa, 27%, Brazil, 34%. We need to improve our tax to GDP ratio. And finally, one area where India is always been found lacking, even in the doing business ranking, is enforcement of contract, the sanctity of contract. So we've had a bankruptcy code, which has brought about better discipline. First time in India's history, companies were liquidated. So this is on formalization. Next, I move to the I of CFID is infrastructure. It has been challenging for foreign investors. It has impacted productivity, efficiency, be it roads, highways. Things are changing. If we need to achieve a 5 trillion economy, we need to double our run rate of infrastructure spend from $150 billion annually to about $300 billion. And 70% of that is going to come from the government. And go back, why? We need to improve our tax to GDP ratio. How are we doing? Let me give you a couple of examples. Highways. India has about 6 million kilometers of road length. I won't talk about the road driving discipline. The national highways is about 140,000 kilometers, of which 30% has been built in the last 6 years. And another 60,000 is proposed to be built in the next 4 to 5 years. So effectively, we would have doubled our highway length in the 10 years time. You look at railways. We have about 68,000 kilometers of railways. We have electrified in the last 70 years, just shade under 30,000 kilometers. And now we plan to electrify our entire railways in the next 5 years. If you look at our power sector, we were a power deficient country with peak power shortages of 14-16%. And now we have repivoted to renewable energy. Our solar energy installed capacity has increased by 1,000 times in the last 10 years. So what the message here is scale and execution. And finally, I move to the last alphabet of this opportunity is digitization. This India stack, ladies and gentlemen, is a game changer. This is based on the concept of presence-less, paperless, cashless, and consent layer. This is the main trigger for financial and technical and technology inclusion of Indian population. What it does, we are trying to have a holy trinity called JAM, wherein we have 1 billion people on biometrics, 1 billion people on mobile, and 1 billion bank accounts. In the last 6 years, we've opened 380 million bank accounts. Why is that important? It allowed us to transfer $100 billion of benefit schemes directly, and it cut down on leakages and corruption. We've moved from credit cards. After 70 years, we had 50 million credit card holders. But now, in last month, we had over 1 billion transactions over internet. And why we've been able to do that is the number of mobile users using internet is about 600 million, and we have our usage of data has increased by 44 times in the last 5 years. Really. So this has been the big trigger. Now, if you have a India opportunity, there is a small wrinkle of taxation. Well, we've tried to make reforms. We've reduced our corporate tax rate by about 10% now to 25%. If you start manufacturing a net corporate tax, new manufacturing by 2023, then it's about 17%. But more importantly, our tax authorities were very infamous for their litigation, very aggressive litigation. But now we have signed 300 advanced pricing agreement to offer predictability and certainty. In fact, we've also made changes on our indirect taxation. India was never one unified market. So now, after this implementation of goods and service tax, which is still work in progress, it is not perfect by any yardstick. However, it's a significant improvement, and it has improvement in our logistics cost. Our logistics cost is about 14% of GDP. We want to bring it to about 10%. It has improved in our size of the warehouses, which were about 5,000 square meters. Now we have 50,000 square meter warehouses. We are cutting down on the lorry time. So really, we want to improve our logistics to make it more efficient. So this brings me to the second section of my presentation, where we spoke about India opportunity, the 4 alphabets, CFIT, consumption, formalization, infrastructure, and digitization, as well as the reform and the changes in the taxation. Now I move to the last part of my presentation, where I speak about the 4 reforms under the 4 letters, 4 L's. These are laws. The first thing we have done is, and we still need to do more, is repeal laws. We have repealed 1,000 laws in the last 5 years. We've brought about a lot of information on our portal so that it can offer transparency and less of manual intervention. What it has done is it has reduced the cost of compliance and the time of compliance. Just go back on the presentation. Yeah. And it has reduced the cost of compliance and the time of compliance. Second, we have the reforms with regards to liquidity. Here, what we have done is, we've been prudent on our fiscal deficit situation. And what we have done is we have offered collateral loans of up to $40 billion for our micro and small enterprises. We've seen a reduction in the bank lending rates. And finally, 2 other areas of reforms which have been challenging is labor and land. I'm sorry about this change in slides. I request other fellow presenters if you can leave this. So on the labor part, we've had over 200 central and state labor laws, but now we are codifying 44 central laws into 4 labor laws. And land acquisition in India was a nightmare. It was challenging, time-consuming, non-transparent, but now we have states offering an online portal. We have states saying if you do not get approval, you have deemed approval in 30 days. In fact, land acquisition was also expensive. Typically, it was not uncommon to have even $100,000 an acre for an industrial land. So what we see on this slide is 44 industrial clusters where nearly 2 million square meters of industrial space is ready for possession in 8 to 10 weeks period. With that, I come to the end of my presentation, wherein I leave it with some of the marquee foreign names across sectors, across countries, which are present in India. We would love to have more Swiss names here. Thank you for your patience. Over to you, Dr. Singh.
Mr. Gupta, thank you for that comprehensive presentation, setting the ground for the webinar. Now, I would like to invite the next speaker, who is also the guest speaker for this webinar, Mr. Pankaj Gulati, Executive Vice President and COO, Continental Device Private Limited, to please come on the screen and make his presentation on Indian microelectronics and precision components sector from the industry perspective. Please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning. Good afternoon from India, but good morning, everybody. I appreciate this opportunity given to me by the embassy and Dr. Singh and the ESC team. Okay, I am going to be, unlike my earlier colleague, and I'm sorry, Mr. Gupta, your slides were slipping because probably my mouse was clicking, so sorry about that. So I would like to touch specifically on microelectronics, precision microelectronics, component manufacturing in India. So before I go into the detail of components, I would rather just give you an overview of what Indian electronics segment is currently doing and what are the proposals going forward. The Indian economy today is one of the largest markets for electronic products in India. Don't worry about it, just summarize the important points. It is expected to reach $1 trillion by 2025. That's the Indian electronics products manufacturing. Current production is about $70 billion, and it employs over 13 million people. So the reason I'm touching on this is because I would like to show how the electronics has grown in the past 5 to 6 years in India. This slide gives an idea on how India has moved in the past few years. If you see, this slide gives an idea from 2014 to 2018. The largest growth has come into the mobile device manufacturing, which grew from 2.9 billion to 24.3 billion. And the rest of the product segments have followed: consumer electronics, industrial electronics, computer hardware, and electronic components, which is the last in the graph, from 6 billion to 9.6 billion. So the largest growth, there's a reason behind this, which I will try and touch upon in my rest of the presentation, is the cellular handsets in terms of number of units. From 60 million units, the mobile phones have gone to 290 million units in the last 5 years. And why has this happened? The Indian government went on to a very specific program of Make in India. Now, in that specific program of Make in India, there was something called phased manufacturing plans, in which there were graded duty structures put on manufacturing, bringing in the component, bringing in the boards, bringing in a fixed mobile phone. So what happened, if you see I go back to this slide, at 60 million, the mobile phones were coming in almost at zero duty, but at 290 million, there's a duty on a finished mobile phone, lesser duty on an assembled board, further less duty on the components and the bare PC board. So this encouraged a lot of manufacturers to come and start doing the assembly in India with the EMS, which is the PCBA. Everybody calls it different. So it's electronics manufacturing services had a huge growth in the last 3 to 5 years in India, and mainly for the mobile segment. Along with it, the LCD and LED TVs, which is again a growing market in India, added on to the EMS facilities. So therefore, you see in the last 5 years, the chunk of the growth has come in the mobile device and the consumer electronics. So now, as far as the segments are concerned, we have different segments on the electronics. These are the segments that are currently moving in India: consumer electronics, industrial electronics, automotive. Automotive is one of the strongest segment in India on the electronics, because now there's a development work going on electric vehicles. And I normally call electric vehicles as electronic vehicles because there's hardly any electric part in it other than just the motor. So the whole electronics of the e-vehicle is being developed in India. The controllers, the rest of the control segments, the sensors, this is all now being developed in India slowly. Therefore, automotive segment is going to be an important key growth segment in India in the next few years. Sorry, I slipped the slide. Okay. Now, India is going to be expected to be 120 billion opportunity. The biggest of it comes from industrial electronics, mobile, consumer, strategic. Strategic electronics is mainly related to defense. Indian government in the past couple of years has opened up the defense sector to private companies depending on the strategic areas. So now it's a situation where even the private companies can participate in the defense sector, and therefore this segment is also expected to take a quantum jump in the next 4 to 5 years. And then we have the computer hardware and the LED. LED is another area which was promoted by the Indian government. There were LED bulbs distributed as low as $1.50, $2 bulbs were distributed by the government to the public. People could go and buy this $2 bulb, in fact less than that, and use that in their homes to bring down the electric consumption. So these are the segments that's an opportunity, 120 billion. And the components market, which is the 31 point of the 120 billion, the components, which is what we are talking of, the precision microelectronic components constitute about 32 billion, in which, because of the mobile phone manufacturing large numbers, the components goes maximum in the mobile phones. To touch back on the mobile phones, India today is the second largest manufacturer of mobile phone in the world. And the focus has been not just make in India, but make in India, make for the world. So that's the focus. Not only it's being made for the people in India, which is a huge population, consumption population, it's also being manufactured for the world. This is where my colleague had a better chart, Mr. Gupta. He showed that how many companies are in India. Now you can see here, these are the electronic companies in India. They're almost everybody, they are present in India because of the India market availability, because of the technology. India today has one of the largest pools of technical people strength, graduates in engineering, in science, in research. So India has been doing a lot of software work. We are known for software for so many years for development, but unfortunately now in the last few years, the hardware manufacturing has now also looked at by the government of India as a focus area. The next slide will tell you what are the segments that are currently being made in India and what happens. If you see PCBs, these are bare boards where the components are assembled. PCB is a segment which India has been manufacturing for years, but at the same time, I think in this segment, India needs a lot of technology support and areas where we can do multi-layer PCBs, flexi-board PCBs. For the automotive market is growing, but unfortunately, the bare boards of PCBs are still being imported because nobody in India is doing a multi-layer, 6-layer, 8-layer, or a flexi board. So this is an area where Indian companies are looking for the right partners and technology. And at the moment, they're focusing on Taiwan. But anywhere, I believe this is also a very strong segment in Europe and Canada. The other area that is the capacitors, resistors, the wound components, which is the passive section. The passive section in India, fortunately, has developed quite a bit, and it's still strong. And there are multiple companies manufacturing each of these segments, products. Unfortunately, none of these companies are today doing the surface mount types. And with the miniaturization, the smaller the product is coming, the components are getting smaller and smaller day by day. So they are now surface mount components that are being used in the mobile phones, in the other equipment. And that's one segment which needs some sort of, again, a technology partnership and investment on the capacitors, resistors, surface mount type. Then comes the third section, which is the diodes, transistors, ICs, and LEDs. This is an area where I come from. I am from the semiconductor side. So what in this section in India, there is only one company which I work for manufacturing the diodes and the transistors, and there is no other company, but there is a huge interest of companies coming in from outside for manufacturing here, because not only there is a design capability of all the chips of the wafers, but there is also a good manufacturing capability available because of the engineering strength that we have. Other area that I would like to touch on this is that a lot of these products are actually have an IP, and India is known. It's something that we believe India is protecting the IP rights very, very clearly, and there is no issue of anybody having any leak or any theft on the IP. So that is the reason that diodes, transistors, and IC is an area which does need to expand and grow. At the same time, it is being manufactured in India to a certain extent. We've been manufacturing it for 50 years, having our own wafer fab in India at one time. So it's a technology that India has managed, but at this point of time, the next generation technology, we do need a partner. And the fourth one is the semiconductor displays, the ATMP, what some of you may call it as OSAT, outsourcing, test, and packaging. This is what I think at this point of time the government is focusing on, because if we talk of wafer fab is not going to work out till there are assembly lines in India. So ATMP is an assembly line for the wafers, for the silicon wafers and the chips. Moment the ATMP lines start in India, the demand for the wafers will go up, and then the wafer fab will follow. So ATMP is an area of focus which I will touch in the rest of my slides, where the government is actually giving special incentives for the companies to come and start assembling the products here in India. The next other part is the electromechanical components, switches, relays, connectors, reasonably being done in India, but as I said, not on that high volume, but large variety. India has always been a large variety industry rather than large volume, because when India started, the color TV started in India sometimes in 80s. They were done with a collaboration with the European companies, and then later on the Japanese came in. We had the Americans come in. So there were part numbers coming from Japan, from Europe, from US, different part numbers. So India has done a lot of variety of products, but not a very high volume. This is what is expected in the next couple of years. The volume would go up because of the currently manufactured products of the components is about 10 billion, and there are 13 billion being imported, with another 11 billion components coming assembled on the PCB. So the market is large enough now for large players to come and start making the investment for assembly of the components, which is the semiconductors, which is the resistors, the surface mount types, the PC boards. And besides this, the two sections which are being looked at by the government now is the sensors and the lithium-ion cells and batteries. These are the developing areas. This is a chart. I'm sorry, it's a little small in size. This is a chart on the semiconductors. You can see the variety that we are doing, but there is really not that world scale volume coming in. As a company, semiconductors, India is also exporting. We are exporting almost 40% of our product to US, to Far East, even to Japan. So the capability wise, India has the capability. It's just trying to find the right partner and the investment volumes, which is what the government of India is now promoting, and which I'll try to show you. These are some of the schemes that have been just back. First of April was notified. Schemes that government of India brought for promotion of electronics. One of them is called PLI, which is the Production Linked Incentive Scheme, which is the first one. Second is called the SPECS, Scheme for Promotion of Electronic Components and Semiconductors. And the third is the EMC, Electronic Manufacturing Clusters. Now, in the PLI scheme, there are direct production linked incentive scheme of 4% to 6%, depending on the base level of the year. The details are available. You can talk to me, or the embassy can share with you, or it's available on the website of the Government of India in the METI section, which is the Ministry of Electronics and Technology. These schemes are actually, India feels that there is a disability factor of about 8 to 10% vis-a-vis the other countries for manufacturing. And this is mainly because of the logistics cost, high power cost, and to a certain extent, the availability of the raw material. So these 8 to 10% disability factor, the government has tried to support this by offering a 4 to 6% production linked incentives. This scheme has been taken very well by the component manufacturers for the mobile phones, because as you can see, the mobile phone manufacturing has grown in India. So the demand for the components has to come in India. and moment the demand comes into India, how long a mobile phone manufacturer will keep buying from an outside country. So because of that, under this scheme, there are many companies expected to start production lines in India. And the moment they start these lines in India, we are expecting that not only the 300 million mobiles that we manufacture today, these lines will be able to feed much higher capacity of the mobile phone production lines, which means India plans to export huge chunk of mobile phones into the other countries. So focus area is on this particular scheme is mainly focusing on the mobile phone component manufacturing. This is the other scheme, which is called the SPECS manufacturing, a scheme for promotion of electronic components manufacturing and semiconductors. Now, semiconductors has been specially kept as a separate thing. This includes capacitors, resistors, anything to do any component and semiconductors. And this scheme is available for is giving a direct capital subsidy of 25%, which is a huge. Now, if a component manufacturer wants to get into a manufacturing in India today, the income tax rate, as informed by my colleague, Mr. Gupta, is about 17% on a new company. You get a 25% capital expenditure reimbursement. India is a large enough market and single market now with the GST. There are other incentives being offered by states. So starting up a new plant in India today is very attractive because of these 3-4 schemes. If everybody adds up onto this, the initial investment outflow will be much lesser, and then thereafter supported by the large Indian market and including by the export, that potential export. So because of this scheme of SPECS has been very well received by companies outside India, and we are already discussing with some companies to plan a semiconductor assembly line in India based on this scheme. The next one, the scheme, in this scheme, as I was trying to tell you, if you can see, there is SMT components, electromechanical components, there are different thresholds. Now, we don't want smaller investments and then asking for a subsidy. So you have to actually invest in terms of, when you talk of crores, it's about 10 million. So INR 50 million is the one investment, the smallest one. Then we have 150 million. So accordingly, there are different thresholds for different segments. This includes the PC boards, the camera modules, electromechanical components, and you can see in this list B, there are discrete semiconductor devices, and thereafter we continue to go, including, if you see in list F and G, there is a wafer fab planned by the government of India with a minimum threshold of 500 crore, which means 5,000 million rupees. At the same time, you can understand that the government is willing to give a subsidy of 25% on the investment of the capital goods, even for a semiconductor wafer fab. And I believe that there are plenty of fabs in Europe wanting to move out into other areas because of the cost, because of changing of technology. I'm aware of some fabs which are 5-inch and 6-inch wafer fabs looking an alternate place for relocation because they want to go to 8-inch, 10-inch, and 12-inch. So India is an excellent place to absorb the fab technology, bring it here. At the same time, not only those companies can buy the products back from this fab, so they don't have to discontinue anything on their product range. They go to the next technology and still continue with this technology, with this requirement of the products. The next one is what I was trying to tell you is the EMC, Electronics Manufacturing Cluster Scheme. In this, the government of India is planning to offer land and develop the clusters against a main anchor electronics manufacturing company. The land can be 200 acres plus, wherein they bring in one large electronics manufacturing company, which does plenty of products, consumer products, other electronic products, instrumentation, and along with that, there'll be other small sub companies sitting around that trying to feed into this company, which is a new scheme of EMC. Government is planning to develop these clusters where the plug-and-play infrastructure will be available common facilities will be available, the hostel facilities will be available. So in this way, it's going to be a huge complex developed by the government, developed by the SPVs, and bringing in a large companies who will then develop that area and the component manufacturing around it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Any questions? I'll be happy to answer, please. Back to Dr. Singh, please.
Thank you, Mr. Gulati. Thank you for that perspective from the industry side, providing us very clear, sectors in which the Swiss companies can think of entering India, and also establishing greenfield units, as you mentioned. We have a few questions, but we will pose these questions at the close of the webinar while we are in the Q&A session. So with that, now let me invite our next speaker, Mr. Ashwin Merchant from TNA Consulting, to make a brief presentation on the precision component sector. Mr. Merchant, can we have you on the screen, please?
Speaking about only the engineering precision components, because Mr. Gulati has been very kind to give the message about the electronics and microelectronics. I'll end with some case studies. Now let's begin with demand drivers. Per se, there are no market size figures available for the engineering precision components, because they are used in a wide range of industries, from aerospace to watches. But there are a few sectors within this which form a large chunk of India's manufacturing. The two most important ones being automotive and electronics. Tarun has already mentioned about the manufacturing sector, so let's take that as base figures for the precision components industry. The gross value added in the manufacturing sector is about $403 billion in 2019 and expected to touch $1 trillion by 2025. What is common between precision components and this whole range of manufacturing industries is machine tools, or mother machines, or as they call it, machines to make machines. And here Switzerland has a very strong presence, being one of the leading innovators and manufacturers. I will not talk about miniaturization and SMT here. Mr. Gulati has already mentioned it. But the key message from this slide is, as India's manufacturing industry grows, especially in the automotive, medtech, and electronic sector, so will the demand for precision instruments. Market opportunities. Now again, I cannot say market opportunities for precision components, but let's use the industries in which they go in. So think of the automotive industry. 2019 turnover of $57 billion. Medical technology, a very fast growing market in India. Market size of $10 billion in 2019. And electronics industry, as Mr. Gulati said, $130 billion. But there are other sectors which are also very strong and which use a lot of precision components. Two which come to mind are aerospace and defense industry, which combined are predicted to grow to about $70 billion by 2030. The Indian aerospace components industry per se is very small today, only around about $250 million. But India has a presence in all the aerospace segments, be it R&D, engineering design, manufacturing, assembly, MRO, because of which a large number of foreign players are set up base like Boeing, Airbus, United Technologies, BAE, Rolls-Royce. This sector was generally dominated by government undertakings, Hindustan Aeronautics, National Aeronautics, Indian Space Research Organization. But today, more and more domestic private players like the Tata Group, the Larsen & Toubro, Mahindra Group, Godrej are also foraying into this sector. The defense sector, well, India is one of the world's biggest spenders in defense, armaments, planes, everything. The Indian government is using the Make in India initiative to draw and attract the defense sector for manufacturing in India, and has got in place the so-called offset program, which is really driving local production. So from this, my main takeaway would be what India witnessed in the automotive sector, in the automobile industry, we can now replicate the same in the aerospace and defense sector. Market trends. The majority of components, the high precision, which require really millimeter level, there's a huge quantity of low-level products which come in from China. Local manufacturing is basically SMEs, the very limited capability, and they cannot really deliver high quality precision components consistently and within time frames. Therefore, majority of the OEMs rely on imports of precision components. The automotive industry, of course, has by far the highest share in terms of consumption of precision turn parts. The demand comes mostly from OEMs and the supply mostly from Tier 1 and Tier 2 manufacturers, majority from Tier 2. The message from this slide is India is still very dependent on imports of precision components. Until the local production matures, there's still a big opportunity to sell in India, test the market, and then set up a manufacturing base. Manufacturing clusters. As you can see, most of them are concentrated on the western part in Maharashtra and Gujarat, and the southern part within Bangalore and Chennai. A strong concentration also in the NCR region. And this is basically due to the fact that many of the end user industries, automotive, electronics, medical technology, are also concentrated in these surroundings. And here, just keep an eye out on this company called Chiramat in Mangalore, which I'll speak about a bit later in my next slide. Now, here I will talk about case studies. On the left-hand side, you have Maxon Precision. This is a company based focusing on microelectronics. Family-owned company, but present in 40 countries. And what's very special about this company, and they have a base in India, is that, since the research for Mars started 20 years back, and the first Mars rover, the Sojourner, landed on July 4th, 1997, Maxon has been providing all the precision drives, all the motors for these rovers till date. In fact, now it is also involved in the European Space Agency's Mars program. On the right-hand side, you have SRM Precision Components. This company has formed a joint venture. There is a Switzerland-based scientist, Dr. Rajendra Joshi. He and his wife have started a company in Jaipur called Rajendra and Ursula Joshi Skill Development Private Limited. They formed a joint venture with SRM called RS India. With an investment of about 40 million, they started a state-of-the-art factory in Jaipur with 250 workers, and today have a capacity of producing nearly 5,650 metric tons per annum. They produce everything in-house from prototypes to large productions, and catering to the medical, aerospace, and automotive industry. Here, before I move to the next slide, let me mention Chiramat, which you saw in the previous slide. This company started as a cottage industry. A gentleman who passed out of the Swiss vocational training program went to Switzerland to do his training, and there he realized that there were a lot of Swiss machines, especially a company called Tornos, very expensive machines, which are being outdated within the Swiss watch industry. So he decided to buy them, bring them to India, retrofit them, and start making components. In 1991, when India liberalized, he formed an EOU. Today, this company has 150 Tornos machines, all second-hand, bought from Switzerland, installed in India, all functioning very well. And they supplied nearly $1.5 million worth of opinions to the Swiss watch industry. They also, in fact, are an outsourcing partner to a company called Polydec, which itself is a manufacturer of precision components. And the strange thing is that they import most of the raw material from Switzerland, from a company called Laminiers Mathe. And just to supply to Chiramat, Laminiers Mathe actually set up a subsidiary in India. Today, Chiramat supplies the defense industry, the aerospace industry, submarines, medicals, and medtech industry, electronic industry, they're all over. But still, except for two citizen state-of-the-art CNC machines, they only use Tornos machines, which they're retrofitted in India. And now to go to my last slide, this is the Swiss presence in India. There are a lot of names out here. Basically, these are companies from the machine tools and, more importantly, from the precision tool industry. You need a combination of both to make precision components. And Switzerland, in fact, as far as machine tools goes, has a very long history. India's first railway manufacturing plant, the integral coach factory set up in Perambur near Chennai, was set up with complete state-of-the-art machinery of those times from Switzerland. Most of these companies are agents, but there are quite a few who are also subsidiaries. And with this, I end my presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Singh. Over to you.
Merchant, for putting before us very pertinent case studies. You also mentioned about late Dr. Rajen Joshi. I should mention to the audience that he was conferred with the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman Award, which is the highest award given by the government of India to a member of Indian diaspora. He was conferred the award last year. He has been, during his lifetime, he was tremendously focused also on vocational education system, and undertook a number of activities in bringing the Swiss form of vocational education system, adapting it to Indian requirement, and establishing a skill development center, which has eventually turned into a university. With those words, now I come to the next section of this webinar, which focuses on the microelectronics and precision components sector from the legal and tax perspective. For this, we have with us our legal and tax partner, Robinson partner. The first presentation will be made by Mr. Soumitra Dole, followed by Ms. Priyanka Limai. So may I please invite Mr. Soumitra Dole to come on the screen and make a presentation. Mr. Dole?
Okay, thank you everyone for.
You could just, yeah. Now you're visible. Yeah.
So thank you everyone for attending today's seminar. I'll just take you through the legal aspects of India entering strategy and the related labor laws pertaining to microelectronics and precision component sector. So as has been explained by Mr. Gupta, Mr. Gulati, and Mr. Merchant, that microelectronics and precision component has a very huge scope in India. So whatever advantages they have mentioned, the one advantage which we have is 100% foreign investment is allowed in microelectronics and precision component sector. So a Swiss firm can come in India and establish themselves either as a private limited company, which is a 100% subsidiary of Swiss company, or maybe they can form a joint venture company in India with a local partner with them. Apart from that, we can have a presence like a license office or project office or a branch office. But if you are going to do a manufacturing in India, then the manufacturing is not allowed under these three options, that is license office, project office, and branch office. So you have to form a subsidiary or a joint venture company in India. Apart from that, the taxation for license office, project office, and branch office is much higher than a taxation which is there for a subsidiary and joint venture company. Moving on to the next, these are the aspects of certain laws which are applicable to this sector. So this is setting up of a company in India. It is now a centralized and digital process. Nowhere a physical document you need to submit. They have fast-tracked the company incorporation process. So nowadays you can even get a company incorporated within a 2 or 3 days time. Apart from that, there are certain registrations which can be done now in parallel with the incorporation process. So certain registrations like income tax registration or labor registrations, those you get as soon as your company is incorporated. So you don't have to apply separately for those registrations. Also, the opening of bank account. This is an additional facility which Ministry of Corporate Affairs is providing. So opening of a bank account can be done simultaneously with the company incorporation. So as soon as your company is incorporated, your bank account is functional in 2 or 3 days time. The sector specific laws are like the 100% FDI policy is there. So it is under automatic route. So you don't need to go to government to get the prior approval. Apart from that, as explained by Mr. Gulati, there are different promotional schemes which has been announced by various state governments as well as the central government. Then you have insolvency and bankruptcy law, which is well defined, and it can be used even in a way to recover your debts from other companies. And labor laws, which is now they are going to standardize the labor laws, and about 40 laws will be combined in 4 laws, which will be applicable to different states. But there will be a one.
Mr. Dole, I think we have just lost the link. Maybe we'll go ahead with the next presentation on tax side by Miss Priyanka Limai, and we can connect Mr. Samit Dole later. Miss Limai, please come on the screen for making your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Uh,
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi. So, good morning to everyone from Switzerland, and good afternoon to the participants from India. I'm Priyanka Limay, and I'll be taking you through some of the tax updates from an India perspective. Now, before we go on to the presentation, why should we know about taxes? This is because for any foreign investor entering the country, it's important to know what would be the cash outflow, an immediate outflow, and tax represents an immediate outflow from the funds and also impacts the liquidity position, and particularly important these COVID times. It also impacts your repatriation strategies, in the sense what money can you take out of the country without being subjected to a tax regime. Therefore, it is important to have some bit of an update or some bit of an information about the taxation system of any country before a decision is taken. Okay, so moving on, this is the
Priyanka, we can't hear you.
hello. Okay. Okay, fine. So within the realm of direct tax, there is the National Indian Law, which is the Indian Income Tax Act. Then India has the so-called tax treaty network, which are the double taxation avoidance agreements, which typically concern foreign investors, because any repatriation that has to be made out of the country will be governed by the provisions of the law, that is the national law, or the tax treaty network, whichever is beneficial in this case. And as far as Switzerland is concerned, there is an agreement or a treaty with Switzerland, which provides for certain beneficial tax rates for royalties or fees for technical services, dividends, and any kind of payments that may be covered by the Indian subsidiary to the foreign parent. Then we have the transfer pricing regime, which concerns transactions between a Swiss parent and its Indian counterpart. So any transactions between two associated enterprises or related enterprises will be subjected to the transfer pricing regulation in the country, and this is at par with international standards, also incorporating some of the suggestions and recommendations of the Organization for Economic Commerce and Development, or the OECD. And then there is the new reformed the equalization levy, which was brought into force, rather revamped from 1st of April 2020 by the finance budget of 2020. This is the realm of the direct tax. Within indirect tax, we have the customs regulation and the foreign trade policy, or the FTP as is so-called, which governs imports and exports out of the country. And then the widely talked about goods and services tax, or GST. Mr. Gupta in his earlier presentation has already given you bits and pieces, of this. So I'll quickly take you through some of the recent updates. The biggest reform that was brought about in the year of 19 was the slashing of income tax rates to 22%. So the earlier regime had rates of 25%, 30%. But then this rates were significantly reduced to 22% for all companies across the board. For manufacturing companies, especially setting up, and able to commence manufacturing from 2023. The rate was further reduced to 15%, but these were subject to certain conditions, but they are quite achievable. It's not very stringent conditions actually. So this makes us, as in India, a most favorable destination as far as the APAC countries is concerned, because the global average that is their prevalent for taxes is about 23, and the Asian average is about 20, and we are quite well placed in terms of the manufacturing companies at 17%, and for normal companies to 25%. The major impact that was brought about in the budget of 2020 was the abolishing of the dividend distribution tax. This has a significant favorable impact on for foreign investors, especially because the earlier regime levied a tax of dividend distribution on the profits repatriated by an Indian company straight flat at 15% grossed up, which came to about 21%. Now this is subjected to a tax. Dividends distributed by the Indian companies are subjected to tax in the hands of the foreign parent or investor, directly, and therefore they are able to access the favorable treaty regime that we spoke about in the earlier slide. This also reduces the tax costs because they are able to now take benefit of the reduced rates under the treaty, which are actually 10%, sometimes 15%, as opposed to the 21% rate which was being levied earlier, and also are able to claim a credit for these taxes in their home country. So the double taxation impact, which was there earlier under the dividend regime, is now gone. And this is likely to have a great impact, favorable impact for investors across all countries coming to India now, going forward. The next one is the digital tax, wherein the equalization levy, where the scope which was earlier restricted to advertising is now spread out to any e-commerce operator doing online businesses, selling goods or provision of services online. So the definition is wide and will probably cover a number of companies doing online businesses, and we'll have to be a little mindful of how this turns out. The other reforms that Mr. Gupta spoke about are, with respect to ease of doing business. So the tax department has been very forthcoming in signing APAs or advanced pricing agreements concerning transactions with associated companies under the transfer pricing regime. Also, there are a lot of mutual agreement procedures between two countries that are being now spoken about, which lead to reduced litigation, because India was largely a litigation prone, or rather known as a litigation prone country. But because of these reforms, the litigation level in India has significantly come down. Also because of the measures taken to digitalize the entire platform. The income tax compliances now can be done online, and is quite simple. It can be done at the click of a button. So all these measures have led to an ease of doing business in India. The other measures are more in line with global updates of the OECD, or Organization for Economic Commerce and Development, where some bit of provisions have been introduced to avoid tax avoidance by companies, which was earlier felt under the base erosion profit shifting project. But then these are actually in line with global standards, so there is again nothing to worry about as such. Now, these are the general updates. Moving ahead to sector specific updates, as such, because the manufacturing sector is now subjected to very, very reduced rate of tax at 15%. As such, there are no significant incentives given specifically to the sector. Research and development expenses are allowed. Weighted deduction is possible at 150% of the actual expense. Employee costs are also allowed as a deduction. GST rates for this sector, particularly the microelectronic and precision component sector, were significantly realigned in the budget of 2020. For instance, the PCBs and other smaller components, the custom duty, the basic custom duty was slashed. There were certain the components which were used in manufacturing, it was slashed, and also the custom duty, in fact, on the other side, the finished goods was increased. So this was to play a level playing field for Indian manufacturers and to promote the Make in India project of the government. Several duty drawback schemes and incentives under export promotion schemes are also available under the customs regime. So this is as far as the specific sector updates are concerned. On the whole, since my time is over, I would just like to say that India is, fast progressing from was slightly, I would say it was slightly difficult to do tax compliance in India, to now a very user friendly and a tax friendly kind of a regime, with the reduced rates, and with the dividend distribution tax gone, and also the e-filing regime that has been now introduced, digitalization. Even the litigation levels are quite low, and as such, this has a great impact for foreign investments. And with that, I end my presentation. And Dr. Singh, over to you. Thank you.
And how it impacts this industry also specifically. Let me now quickly move on to the Q&A session. Not much time left, so I'll pose my first question to Mr. Gulati, who is our guest speaker. Mr. Gulati, the question, you may like to come on the screen. The question reads, innovation plays an important role in growth of end user segment for microelectronics and precision components. How is India positioning itself as an innovation hub?
There are a couple of such schemes going on. There are many startups in electronics that are happening. Then there is an incubation centers that have been started by the educational institute and also supported by the Ministry of Electronics. Plenty of them have come up in the last 3-4 years. In fact, India has the largest startups in the last 2 years. And the development and the electronics design are all being done in these incubation centers, supported by the government, by the educational institutes, and also by the private organizations. So plenty of them, with the students coming out straight after graduation, not going to job and going straight for the incubation center, trying to get into the entrepreneur development activities or for the electronics, because that's the growing market here now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gulati. The next question is again posed to you. Any details on particular industrial clusters which have seen participation of major OEMs from Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, who are leading players in this segment?
Right. What has happened is that when a company comes from any country and they start something, then normally the infrastructure around it, the ecosystem starts developing. So initially, the Koreans came in, the South Koreans came in and started in the NCR area, in the Noida area, which is NCR, and that was the LG, Samsung. So that area has then been developed as a Korean manufacturing hub, where LG, Samsung, and the allied companies which are supporting that industry have all come up. So Korea and Japan have both are close to the NCR, and Taiwan is developing a cluster in south part of India, close to Bangalore. So India is a huge, wide country. So there are different clusters available, but Taiwan has gone into south, and Japanese and Koreans have come to the NCR area.
Thank you, Mr. Gulati. One more question to you, seeking your views on Indian design engineers for industrial technical developments for linking 3D and 2D designs.
India is known for design. India is actually, that's what I'm from the hardware side, but I did my studies also in design. So India is known for design. I think that's a forte we have. The IITs, there were 5 IITs and they're now expanded into having more IITs, the engineering colleges. They are focusing on design. The advantage is that a designer can sit anywhere with a laptop and the library of the IPs and then do the design. So India is doing extremely well on that. The 3D and the 2D designs are being done here. In fact, the other day we were having a meeting with the Ministry of Electronics. We now want to manufacture something on the 3D side. So we have to go into the manufacturing part of 3D. There is no shortage of design as such in India. Any other question anybody has? I'm also a member of the Electronics Association, Industry Association. I was the past president. They can feel free to shoot me out later on the email or anywhere, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gulati. Thank you for participating in this webinar as a guest speaker. Now, let me move to the last question, because time is completely over, to Mr. Gupta. The question is that how does Indian automotive segment, which is a major end user segment, adjusting to the post-COVID era, where there has been a major slump in demand? So, it's a very pertinent
and I think
question.
The importance of Indian automotive sector can be seen that it accounts for nearly 50% of the total manufacturing value of the Indian in the Indian environment. And second characteristic is that Indian auto component suppliers, 75% of their exports go to OECD countries. So it's world class, right? However, the challenge now is we need to develop our microelectronics, because the whole vehicle architecture has changed. And we have been importing that significantly from South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. So now there are companies who are setting up this, and there is an element where they're looking for technology participation. And that's where we feel Switzerland play a very important role. These Indian auto component companies have strong balance sheets, but there is a technology gap. And that's an opportunity for Swiss companies.
Thank you, Mr. Gupta. The companies who have joined us today would have heard your message. Thank you. With that, we come to the conclusion of this webinar. This was the penultimate webinar in the series of 12. The last webinar in this webinar series would be taking place at 3 p.m. Swiss time today. It's focused on Indian electronics sector and opportunities for collaboration between India and Switzerland. We'll be glad if you could participate. We'll be uploading all these presentations which we made today on our website. We'll be converting this webinar into a video podcast, and we'll also be uploading it. We hope that we have been able to reiterate and reinforce the idea that there are strong complementarities between India and Switzerland. A lot of these have been used by the Indian business ecosystem. A lot are new, which remain to be utilized. We look forward to great India-Switzerland relationship in the coming years and decades and centuries. Thank you. With those words, have a good day ahead.